Welcome everybody to this next video in our series called Using the English Curriculum to Plan Effectively. This is video 2 in the series of 6, and we're going to focus here on the Common European Framework of Reference of Languages, known by the acronym CEFR in English and EVK in Dutch. Remember to download the study guide, which can be found in our Toledo course. If you have not downloaded it already for the first video, this study guide follows all 6 videos in this series. Okay, let's get started. What we're going to do first is watch a short film called A Language Story. In this film, a young boy by the name of Joachim has a problem. You have to determine what is the problem that Joachim faces, and also think about what might be a possible solution to this problem. Enjoy this little film, and after the film, it'll bring you back to this presentation. Once upon a time in Belgium, Joachim dreamt of going to Liverpool, England, where he hoped to meet Mr. Bean. He jumped up and started walking to France, where he met Fancy Flo. They started talking. Blah blah, said Joachim. Fancy Flo was impressed. Great English, she said. This inspired Joachim to fly all the way to England. While talking on his phone in the pub, Joachim met Crazy Cat. Bacon worst. Cat was not impressed. Your English hurts my ears. Joachim was frustrated. Was his English good or bad? Okay, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that short film called A Language Story. What is Joachim's problem? Well, it's very simple, isn't it? Joachim met 2 people on his way to Liverpool, Fancy Flo and Crazy Cat. When he spoke to both of those women, they perceived his language use to be different. Fancy Flo thought he spoke really good English, but Crazy Cat, a native speaker, thought that he spoke English poorly. This is a problem. This frustrated Joachim, of course, in the story. Did he have good language use or poor language use? And that's the problem here. So, the Council of Europe recognized this problem. And if you don't know what the Council of Europe is an organization made up of 47 member states from Europe. Their primary focus is to promote democracy, human rights, and the rule of law here in Europe. Under the democracy platform, they do a lot with language study and education. And so, they realize that there's a problem here. If more and more people are going to cross borders to live and to work in different countries, then we need some sort of standard in which to evaluate or analyze somebody's language use. So, after 20 years of talking about this and research, in 2001, the Council of Europe produced a seminal document, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. Yes, definitely a mouthful. Try to say that 3 times fast. But the CEFR, not so easy itself either, but the CEFR is a very, very important document here in Europe and actually across the world. It sets a standard or a series of standards in which to evaluate someone's language use. And that's very, very important. So now when people go to look for a job, and have to use a language other than their mother tongue, they have to be able to describe how well they use that language. For example, with me living here in Belgium and working in a university college, the university college that I work for requires that non-native Dutch speakers be able to perform at something called the B2 level. So I have to prove to them that I can speak Dutch at this B2 level. And the B2 level has very specific statements that describe what it is I need to be able to do. I don't have to talk and speak as well as a native speaker, primarily because I'm not teaching in Dutch, I'm teaching in English. So if I was to go to work for another company, it might be B2. Maybe if I was going to be a laborer of some kind here in Belgium, it might be an A2 level. But what exactly does that mean? That's what the Council of Europe in the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages set out to do. So what they did, they produced a scale. And the scale compares two things. First, it compares 6 skills, which is interesting because we actually only use 5 of those skills. But notice what they do here is they add an additional writing skill. They talk about writing production, which is what somebody does on their own, and writing interaction, which is writing that occurs between more than 2 people or 2 or more people. So that's very interesting that they do that. Very few people have picked up on that, especially here in Belgium, to use it. You'll notice that we do now here in Belgium use the first 5 skills. We use reading and listening, speaking production, which is just called speaking, and speaking interaction or conversational English, and then writing, which for us truly encompasses writing production here in Belgium. Each one of these 6 scales is then compared at different levels. There's 3 basic levels: basic, independent, and proficient. Each one of these is divided into 2 subsections, and these are labeled A1 and A2 for basic, B1 and B2 for independent, and C1 and C2 for proficient. And what the scale does then, if you compare, you want to see what is reading at A1 or what is listening at A2 or what is speaking interaction at B2, what they do is they give you a set of descriptors. And this is an important word. We're going to be using it a lot this semester. And for this case, their descriptors are what are referred to as the can-do statement. So a person who reads at the A1 level can do this. A person who can listen at the B1 level can do this. So they produced this scale, which was probably the most important piece to come out of their work. Although you can read the document, I don't suggest that you do. It's kind of boring. But it does have more information about language instruction and language evaluation and language portfolios and things like that. It's a very, very useful document. It's still very much important in the whole of Europe. You can go to the Media Base site if you're looking for a job, and they'll tell you now that you need to have, your Netherlands needs to be at a C1 or a C2, and your French needs to be at a B2, and your English at a B1. They'll actually say that now in job postings, so it's very important. So this is a part of the self-assessment scale, so you can self-assess yourself. And just to get a closer look at those descriptors, notice they start with I can. I can understand phrases and the highest frequency vocabulary related to the areas, blah, blah, blah. I can catch the main points in short, clear, simple messages and announcements. So it's very specific for each of the levels and for each of these skills. So you can compare. And this is a very useful document when it comes to planning. We're going to see in just a little bit. What is interesting is research has been done to say how much instruction is needed for a person to move from A1 to A2 to B1 all the way up to C2. And here you can see it's a lot. So, for example, if a person has no knowledge whatsoever of a new language, just to get to the A1 level, which is very, very simple, they need approximately 90 to 100 hours of instruction. 90 to 100 hours of instruction. And we're going to see how this plays out in comparison to the curriculum in just a couple minutes. But notice how the jumps as we move along. So to go to A2, you need another 90 to 100 hours. But to move into B1, you need another 170 or 200 more hours to move to a B1 level. Then another 150 to 200 to move to a B2 level. And then notice to get up to a C2, you need approximately 1,000 to 1,200 hours of instruction. And what is an hour of instruction is not totally clear in this research, but that's a lot of time to move up. I mean, it's possible that a lot of people never ever truly reach a C2 level when studying a language because of the time element. It is possible to meet the B2 level and maybe even the C1 level, depending on your dedication to learning a language. The British Council, along with the Equals group, has put together a nice document that is available for you in Toledo that takes the Common European Framework of Reference of Languages and applies it to language instruction, like what should be taught at the A1 level, what should be taught at the B1 level. In addition, Cambridge University Press is doing a lot of work on this area as well. We're going to see later in the course one of their sites called the English Vocabulary Profile site, which actually delineates words, vocabulary words, and at what level possibly they start to inch into a person's vocabulary, I think, which can be very helpful for us as teachers. So that's a basic overview of the document. So really, how does this help Joachim? Remember Joachim's problem. Fancy Flo thought he had good English, Fancy Flo from France, but native speaker Crazy Cat thought that he had a poor English. Now that we have the CEFR, they both have a scale in which to compare his English use. So now, hopefully, they're both speaking the same language, and they both think that, let's say, Joachim has a B1 level in this case. That's great. That's the idea behind the CEFR, is that everybody here in Europe and in other countries that are using the document, for example, in Australia, in India as well, in the Orient countries, so Japan is using it, Korea is using it. We can all now speak the same language. We all know what a B1 is, and that's very, very important. So that's the importance of this document. So it's a document that will allow us to compare and analyze a person's language use based on a set of standards or descriptors or can-do statements. Now, what has happened here in Flanders? This is specific to Flanders. The Department of Education has taken this document, and for the various levels of education and for the various skills, and notice they only use the 5 skills, but they do add something called global, which is an overall view of somebody's language. They indicate at what level a student should or hopefully will be performing when they are done with instruction at these levels. So for example, let's take the A1. The A1, that is at the end of the second form of the first grade. Hopefully across the board, the students have moved out of the A1 level. They're inching into or are firmly into the A2 level of the scale. Notice the global is definitely in A2. They're looking for them to be beyond that A1. I mean, and part of the reasoning for that, of course, is that Belgian or Flemish students come into your classroom with more exposure to English than students in other countries or in other regions here of Belgium. So there's an understanding that we don't necessarily have to teach those first 90 to 100 hours of instruction because they've had a lot of exposure. But what you will need to do as a teacher is to make sure that that exposure is something you can work with. And we'll talk about that when we talk about assessment. Notice by the end of the third grade, ISO, firmly students should be in the B1 level. This has ramifications, for example, for hogeschool or university colleges like Thomas More. Almost every single program teaches some form of English. Now we should understand that students that come to us from secondary school should be able to perform at a B1 level. Therefore, we in the hogeschool or the university colleges should be working to move them into the B2 or the C1 level, depending on how many hours of instruction we can give our students. A notice for the end of the third grade for the CASO and the TESO. Again, we're staying within that A2 level, hopefully inching into that B1 level, maybe even halfway B1 plus, a lot of people refer to it. But notice in BASO, depending on the direction the students are following, in the second year, if they're studying English, we expect it to be a very, very low-level production, A1. The understanding here is that these students may have had less exposure to English, or they're less cognizant of the English being used around them. But by the time they finish BASO, we're hoping for them to be at that A1 plus A2 level totally. So this is interesting. So this is something that you should keep in mind, and it's something you can use to help you plan effectively down the road. So the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, it is a European document. It's recognized all over Europe. It does have ramifications here in the Flemish area, so we should be used to it. What you have up in Toledo, I've given you some self-assessment scales, some other information that you can find, plus a link to the complete document in English or Dutch if you'd like to read the whole thing. So that is a brief introduction to the Common European Framework of Reference of Languages. We're going to actually come back to this document and to the equals document a little later in this video series when we're talking about planning. Okay? Great. I'll see you in video 3. Thank you.